Hello and welcome to WashingtonExec's video series. I'm your host, Amanda Ziadeh, and with me today is Juliana Vida, Chief Technical Advisor for Public Sector at Splunk. Thank you so much for joining me today, Juliana.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Of course. So we're discussing the pivot to cloud during COVID-19 as the government workforce goes largely remote for the foreseeable future. So Juliana, how have you seen the government workforce quickly pivot to cloud services during the pandemic?
Well, of course, that's the question of the year for sure. Yes, everyone had to pivot in the government for obvious reasons. And of course, what we saw was that the organizations who had already made some investments in cloud and had already started to modernize and move all of their their workloads to the cloud, those agencies and organizations fared much better in the initial days once the world basically switched from how we used to work to work from home, work remote, because they were able to spin up very quickly to the excess demand, the excess needs, the exponential increase in the number of users that were using their networks and connecting through VPN, et cetera. So that was good for the agencies that had already started to modernize, but what about those who didn't? So what we then saw was an acceleration of plans that had been on the shelf or had maybe been slowed down in terms of how fast those agencies were planning on, making the big muscle movements to move to cloud. That started to pick up, and it's good. I mean, I hate to say it was a good thing, but I think we all have learned now that there will be some good things that come out of this pandemic, and that acceleration through and past what used to be barriers, I think, is one of the most positive things that we've seen as agencies have pivoted through the pandemic and made adjustments.
Right. So which cloud services are helping government agencies quickly respond to COVID-19's impact or challenges? And are any of these services citizen-facing?
Yeah, I'd actually like to start with the end of your question, and that is which are citizen-facing, because I think those are the stories and the examples that really make the point about the value of cloud, whether it's whatever kind of hybrid environment that it is, because most agencies do have hybrid environment. Right. They have some that are on-prem and will stay on-prem. They have some in different clouds, perhaps, different workloads going to different new environments. But the way that, like I said, to tell the story the best is to use examples that everyone can relate to. One of them is the U.S. Bureau of the Census. Most of us, I think, don't really think about it. It's like, well, 10 years went by again. It's time for the census. Except that this year, which, by the way, they've been doing since 1790. So that organization has been around for a while. But this year was the first year that they were already planning to do it digitally anyway. Well, fortunately, in the run-up to that digital census, they had already started to modernize and bring in a lot of modern technology and move some workloads to the cloud and invest in modern technologies, because that allowed them then to still execute on the census and asking us all to fill in our questionnaire digitally for the first time ever. Imagine if they hadn't done that. Imagine if, roll back the clock 9 months, and they were getting ready to roll out the decennial census like they always do, with door-to-door folks, with their clipboard asking you to fill in the sheet. It would never have happened because we weren't going door-to-door in the early days of the pandemic. And the census, it churns out the data that so many of us get our government services from, the analysis. How many schools? Where's the healthcare? What are what kind of budget states get, and what kind of budget do small businesses get, and market information and all of that. So again, the beauty of the cloud for a clearly citizen-facing mission is sorry, you can see how that works just looking at the Census Bureau, and that just happened to be this year that they did the decennial census.
How do you foresee this pivot to cloud continuing or evolving as we adapt to what everyone's referring to as a new normal? And will agencies have to change the way they secure their IT infrastructure in response?
Yeah. Well, first I'll start with the first part. Absolutely, this is going to shift the way we work and the way we live in many ways. People say we'll never go back. We'll still go back to some of those behaviors because we're human and that's what we do. But what I think is that what people are realizing now, what we call at Splunk is the dawn of the data age, is now everyone has started to realize the value of data in their everyday lives in a way that a year ago, most people didn't. Most people weren't thinking about boy, what if I have to work from home every day? And so does the rest of my family. And so, my children are learning from home and I can't see my doctor anymore and I have to go see them online. So now this data thing that previously was probably only affecting a small portion of the citizenry because, we were either IT people or in the IT vendor space, now affects everyone. And going back to human behavior, a lot of times we feel like if something isn't happening to me, it's not happening. Well, now it's happening. And so people are watching dashboards live on TV with reports about COVID spikes and where the next spike is going to be, or are there enough respirators, for example. All of that is driven by data, and now people care about it. And they are learning how to make the best use of data in their everyday lives. So again, I think as the post-pandemic world continues to roll out and change, that reliance on data, that isn't going to change because we've moved past a lot of the previously held paradigms and assumptions that we had about can people be productive when they aren't in the office, or can children learn in a remote environment and learn quickly. And so we've shattered some of those assumptions. And I honestly think that that's a good thing in many cases. To your point about security, absolutely. Maybe it's just irony or timing or whatever, but now that we're in this pandemic, we're also seeing a very quick acceleration of an adoption of a new security framework called Zero Trust. Basically, it used to be where we had this sense that everything inside the perimeter was safe, inside my workplace network or my on-site, if I worked in a government building, for example, and I only had to authenticate one time, use my CAC or my PIV card. And once I'm in, I can move around and I can go to whatever application and send email to anybody I want and all that. One-time authentication, now you're trusted. Well, now we've learned, I think through the pandemic and with acceleration of just users getting on networks from home and at work and connecting devices and finding shortcuts because they just want to get through their day, and help their kids log on and all that. Now there's this shift to this new framework called Zero Trust, where sure, you might be trusted once to get inside some kind of invisible boundary, but every time you go to click on some other application or you try to plug in a device or log in from a different server, you're going to be authenticated again, because there are just too many threats and too many vectors, and not to mention the bad guys that are out there using this pandemic to their advantage, to take full advantage of us. So that's the big shift in cybersecurity, I think, or in kind of security practices, is the shift to trust no one really and authenticate them at every move, because that's the best way to protect from all these threat actors, threat devices from infecting the whole network and taking systems and applications down.
Right, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing these insights with us, and an extremely confusing time for everyone to figure out anyway. So we appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.